Brad Marchand has dealt to the Florida Panthers, and this mars what otherwise was a pretty nice little trade deadline for Don Sweeney and the Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. This is a special trade deadline recap episode, and I don't even know where to start. Brad Marchand has been traded to the Florida Panthers. Soak that in for a moment. Brad Marchand, our captain, the longest standing member of the Boston Bruins, the only remaining player from the 2011 Stanley Cup champions, has been traded to the Florida Panthers, the team that knocked the Bruins out of the playoffs in each of the past two seasons. That's not all that Don Sweeney accomplished prior to the trade deadline. We're going to break down the Marchand deal, Charlie Coyle going to the Colorado Avalanche, and Brandon Carlo being sent to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and also touch on the other deals that Sweeney had made in previous days. Before we get into all that, a quick thank you for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. It's available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can also follow along on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, Blue Sky, Instagram, primarily still on X for now. And you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. Now, here on Friday, we had a couple bombs dropped by the Boston Bruins, and none of this is yet official as I record here at 4:30 p.m. But the Bruins reportedly have traded Charlie Coyle to the Colorado Avalanche and Brandon Carlo to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And amid that, as we were processing that, it drops right before the deadline that Brad Marchand has been traded to the Florida Panthers. Our captain, our Rat King, a beloved member of this team for almost 2 decades now, traded to the team that has beaten the Bruins in each of the past 2 rounds of the playoffs, ended their historic regular season in round 1 just 2 years ago. And it is still something that I'm processing here. And the reported return is a second-round pick or a conditional first-round pick. The Florida Panthers don't have their first-round picks in either this year or next, so that conditional pick would be in 2028. Now, what happened on free agent at taking weekend against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So perhaps there's some questions about his playoff availability or if he will be able to return at any point this season, and also questions about whether he was going to resign with the Boston Bruins. It's believed that he was looking for 3-4 years on his next contract. The Bruins, over the last little while, have typically given their captains, Patrice Bergeron, Zdeno Chara, like 1 or 2 year deals in the later years of their contract. Marchand still has a lot of gas left in the tank. We saw him perform well at the Four Nations face-off. He's got his eyes on taking part at the Olympics next season as a member of Team Canada. So why the underwhelming return? Well, he did have some control over where he wanted to go. Perhaps he was so enamored with Sam Reinhart, Sam Bennett at the Four Nations face-off where they all played for Team Canada that he wanted to go to the Panthers. And the Bruins were kind of beholden to what the return was going to be. Or perhaps his value just wasn't that high, which is hard to imagine. And maybe there are indeed some concerns about his health, about his status moving forward as an impending unrestricted free and whether or not he would stick around long term. the optics around this are very poor. There is a big wave of resistance on social media in regards to this trade. I feel like if Sweeney had stopped at trading Carlo and Coyle after having traded Justin Brazeau, Trent Frederick, that it would have been seen as a very successful trade deadline. And we'll get into what he was able to do elsewhere later on in the podcast. Brad Marchand said he wanted to end his career in black and gold. He made that very clear. Whether the Bruins were unwilling to give him the term that he wanted or meet the valuation that he wanted. Don't forget, he's been playing on a very team-friendly contract for the Boston Bruins over the last number of years. It really sucks that he went to the Florida Panthers of all teams. The reports were that he was going to be perhaps traded out west, which was easier to swallow because it wouldn't be an immediate rival. Even if it was in the Metropolitan Division, that would be easier to take. But the fact that he's going to the Panthers of all teams is really, really difficult to swallow. And the fact that it is not the best return is really difficult. Now, we don't know the exact nature. Again, it's being reported that it is a second round pick or a conditional first. They don't have a first round pick this year or next, the Panthers. So the next available first round pick for this team is 2027. I apologize. I think I said 2028 earlier. They do have a second round pick in 2026. So it could be a second round pick in 2026. And if Marchand meets certain benchmarks or the Panthers win the cup, say, then it could turn into a first round pick in 2027. It's going to take a while to digest trading the captain, a player who appeared on this podcast just last year, a guy that I have been enamored with as a player for quite some time. And I've said it so many times on the podcast and in conversations. Brad Marchand is the kind of player that every fan base hates unless they had him on their team. If he had been drafted and developed by any other franchise, he would be beloved by that team, especially if he had accomplished what he did with the Bruins with that club. And now he's going to go to the Florida Panthers, perhaps try to help them defend their Stanley Cup championship. The way that his season ended last year, he did come back, but, after being kind of sucker punched by Sam Bennett, the way that Bruins were beaten, they ruined Patrice Bergeron's swan song a couple playoffs ago by upsetting the Bruins in the first round. It will be difficult to see Marchand playing for this team, but he must have buried the hatchet with the Panthers, who are at the Four Nations face-off. He, when healthy and at full strength, even at this stage in his career, still has a lot to bring to the table. We saw that last season in the playoffs against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And we're going to have to take some time on the podcast to break down Don Sweeney's rationale for making this deal. He's set to meet with the media later on here on Friday, so we'll break that down on Monday's episode for sure. And also to just appreciate the legacy that he has left for the Boston Bruins, all that he has done. His career arc is as fascinating as any other player in the NHL today, going from a fourth line grinder, all the shady plays, suspensions, and then developing into an elite winger at the NHL level, one of the best at his position over the last several years. Unfortunately, not able to win a second cup, but he does have that Stanley Cup champions tattoo to remember his time in Boston, and he should have his number retired someday and go into the Hall of Fame as a member of the Boston Bruins. There's a possibility that there's could finish his career in black and gold, but you never know what's going on behind the scenes. If there's any hard feelings that came from the deal, from the process. But ideally, he chose to go to Florida and said to the Bruins, let's circle back in the summer and I can re-sign and finish my career here under the right terms, but that is not guaranteed at all. And you never know what's going to happen. Maybe he does win a cup in Florida and loves it down there. Or maybe another franchise comes calling with more than the Bruins are willing to offer. Trading him will have an effect. It's certainly having an effect on the fan base. And it's just part of what the Bruins did. We're going to touch on the Charlie Coyle to Colorado trade and the Brandon Carlo to Toronto trade here as the podcast continues. When the game tips off, the action is just getting started on the NBA courts, and there's no better place to get in on that than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Brad Marchand reportedly off to the Florida Panthers, and my old colleague at The Score, Justin Bourne, kind of echoing what I said earlier about Brad Marchand's destination and it being kind of a matter of Marchand kind of giving us a short list of where he wanted to go. And he said if Marchand went to Florida for what's essentially what Anthony Beauvillier fetched from the Washington Capitals to the Pittsburgh Penguins, a second could become a first. It's clear he gave Boston a very small list of options of where he'd go. They wanted to do right by him and then handed leverage to Florida. Question mark, that is certainly a possibility. I would have perhaps just held on to him, but maybe he wanted a chance to play elsewhere. So it's not necessarily just in Don Sweeney's control here or purview what the return was. Now, there were a couple other moves made earlier today. The first, and this is all reported, these haven't been verified or corroborated yet by the team, but it's all coming from reputable insiders. Brandon Carlo traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for a first-round pick and prospect Fraser Minton, which is a really nice return for Brandon Carlo. Yes, he's got a very reasonable contract, $4.1 million. He's got 2 more years left on that deal, and it will look even better once the cap goes up. But to get a first-round pick and Minton, who was a second-round pick and who, pretty highly touted coming out of the junior ranks, that's a nice return for Brandon Carlo, who, let's be honest, yes, he is an exceptional penalty killer. He's a very steady stay-at-home presence, and he's a leader in the locker room. But asset management-wise, that's a pretty nice return for Carlo, who's 28 years old and not getting, any fresher as an NHL defenseman who's logged some pretty heavy defensive minutes over the course of his career. So, yes, it hurts to give up Carlo. It hurts to lose him from the penalty kill. It hurts to lose his leadership, especially when you are already trading your captain in Brad Marchand. But to get a first, we don't know exactly the year yet or if there's any conditions on that. But to get a first, all years ago, 2022, he's described by Dauber prospects as a north-south center with above-average intelligence and defensive abilities. Needs to round out his puck skills and add some finesse, but could become a middle six forward at the NHL. This year, he's played in 26 games for the Toronto Marlies, 6 goals, 7 assists, 2 goals, 2 assists in 15 games for the Maple Leafs. He did crack the team last year out of camp as well, and a bright future for this kid on paper. So, yes, it hurts to lose Brandon Carlo, but that's a nice little piece of work for Don Sweeney. And it comes after he had, again, reportedly traded Charlie Coyle to the Colorado Avalanche. Again, a guy who's been around for quite a while. What was it, 2018 or something like that? He was acquired. He is 33 years old. He's got this season plus next on his contract. So the Avs are picking him up not only for this playoff run, but next as well. But the Bruins are getting back a nice package for Charlie Coyle. Center Casey Middlestat. They are also getting a second-round pick in 2025 and prospect winger Will Zellers. The Bruins are sending a fifth-round pick in 2026 to Colorado as well. Middlestat has 2 years left on his contract with an average annual value of $5.75 million. So a bit higher cap hit than 7 years younger, and a guy who was also pretty highly touted coming out of the draft. He was picked in the first round. Not quite a hit when it came to his career with the Buffalo Sabres, but he had a 47-point season in 62 games with the Sabres 2 years ago. He had 10 points in 18 games for the Colorado Avalanche last season. This year, 11 goals, 34 assists. He is only 26 years old, so 6-7 years younger than Coyle. Drafted 8th overall in the 2017 NHL entry draft. Zellers was a third-round pick very recently by the Colorado Avalanche, and he's been lighting up the USHL at the moment with 37 goals in 40 games. He's committed to North Dakota, the NCAA, so he's a bit off in terms of when we could expect him to jump to the pros, but all the talent in the world for this kid as a potential scorer. I always like to turn to Dauber prospects for the for the scouting reports. They call him a high-skilled shooter and puck handler who accelerates every puck he gets. Boom or bust project with second-line upside. Not bad at all for an addition to even if it was Coyle for Middlestat, happy, but to get Zellers on top of that, he instantly becomes one of the Bruins' top prospects. And to get a second-round pick while flipping a fifth-round pick, again, if Sweeney had stopped there, on top of what he did with acquiring Jacob Lauko and Nustadov from the Minnesota Wild, also the trade that he pulled off with Trent Frederick, with what was the other one? Yeah, Justin Brazeau, Coyle, Carlo, all those together would have looked pretty nice. Getting some really nice assets in exchange for a couple guys who are RFAs and some guys who are perhaps a bit longer in the tooth. Hustnudinov is how you pronounce his name. That's a nice piece of business for Don Sweeney. Coyle, still, fairly in his prime, but aging out a little bit. You have Coyle, who's well past his prime, and last season's career year looks like a bit of an aberration. And to get some picks, to get some prospects, to get Casey Middlestat and Hunusninov and some real decent pieces in return. That really helping the retool. But it all kind of loses its luster when you add in the Brad Marchand trade on top of that. And still processing. The Bruins did recoup a bunch of nice assets here moving forward. I think Middlestat still has another level to hit. He had, again, 47 points or whatever last season. He is a guy that they can indeed try to plug in at second line center or third line center. They were able to get the second round pick from Edmonton via St. Louis, a second round pick from Colorado, a fourth round pick as well in the Frederick deal. They now have the conditional first or second from Florida, a first coming in from Toronto. So some nice picks and assets. And, you can crap on Sweeney's draft record, but Matt Poitras, Mason Lohrei are guys who were recently selected in the second round. And here we have the Bruins officially announcing these trades. You have Coyle and a fifth round pick in 2026 to Colorado for their second round pick, Casey Middlestat, William Zellers. And that's the only one that also had Lauko and Hunusninov trade last night. The Trent Frederick trade. What does this all mean for the Boston Bruins moving forward? We're going to touch on that here as this bonus episode continues. If you're like me, the NHL trade deadline has been fueled by good cups of coffee. I got tired of settling for my grocery store brands, though. They weren't just cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, their coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. If you don't love your first bag, no worries. They'll replace it for free until they get it just right. And right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl. That's drinktrade.com/lockedonnhl for 40% off your first order. You will not regret it. It is fantastic coffee. All right, so I had been advocating for the Bruins to enter into sell mode ahead of the trade deadline because it was clearly a seller's market. Teams were coughing up big returns for the chance to load up for the playoff run. And boy, did they do that. They certainly went into sell mode. And for me, the additions of Casey Middlestat, William Zellers, a couple second-round picks, an energy guy in Jacob Lauko, a guy with some upside in what they're getting. Fraser Minton, a first-round pick from the Maple Leafs, whatever comes back in exchange for Brad Marchand. Like, these are, on the surface, pretty savvy moves from Don Sweeney in what is now a lost season. You have a core of Jeremy Swayman, Charlie McAvoy, David Pastrnak. You have Hampus Lindholm, Pavel Zacha as kind of secondary guys. And you have some guys who, there's value there that you should mine in what is a lost season. The Bruins have gone all in and then some on many occasions in the past, and it was time to recoup some picks, time to beef up the prospect pipeline, time to bring in some younger guys with some upside. But what's curious to me is this is coming after they had already invested this past offseason in Elias Lindholm, and who, under this kind of philosophy of retooling, should be guys that you might be moving out. Already their contracts are not looking very good. And you're committed to Lindholm for 6 more years at $7.75 million. That will look better as the cap goes up, but still, you have Zadorov committed for several more years at around $5 million. It's clear that money would have been better spent re-upping with Jake DeBrusk, but that ship has sailed. The Bruins retool would look better if those guys weren't on the books and they weren't underperforming. And the moves that were made by Don Sweeney would have looked better if they hadn't also traded Brad Marchand. Now, again, we'll learn whether or not Marchand had some say in that, and whether that's, if he was going to go, that's where he wanted to go. Maybe there's a wink, wink, I'll re-sign in the summer, but the optics aren't great when it comes to trading Marchand to the Florida Panthers. And it's confusing because they have invested in these other guys who will be around for some time, and you've kind of gutted your leadership core as well. Marchand's the captain. Carlo and Coyle have worn A's. Who's the new captain? Who fills that leadership vacuum in the locker room? The veterans are now Lindholm, Elias. They're now Nikita Zadorov. Those are kind of like the older guys on this team. And more is going to be asked of them as guys who are being highly paid on this team and who the Bruins have made a commitment to for quite some time. It's also interesting that the moves they didn't make, they retained Morgan Geekie and John Beecher. They're pending restricted free agents. They did not trade Parker Witherspoon as a pending unrestricted free agent. I think overall the Bruins did well to sell some assets and to recoup some picks and prospects. I've been saying that all along. That's something they should do. I think the Coyle trade is pretty much a home run to get a second, to get a pretty intriguing prospect, and to get Casey Middlestat, who is 6-7 years his junior, plays a similar role with more offensive upside. That's a win. To get a prospect like Fraser Minton and a first-round pick for Brandon Carlo, asset management wise, that's a win. To trade Justin Brazeau for a couple guys, a guy that we know in Lauko, and Nusnidov, who has some upside as well as a depth center, and they're restricted free agent. That's a win. To get a second round pick for Fred, who was unlikely to come back, another pick for Max Jones. Like, these are smart asset management moves, but you lose some of the luster on them, and you lose the optics battle here and a lot of goodwill with the fans because of the decision to trade Brad Marchand. It would have gone a lot better if they stick it out with him and try to renegotiate, re-sign him instead of trading him to Florida of all teams. It's being reported now that the Bruins are retaining 15% on the Carlo deal. So that, I guess, was more of an incentive for the Leafs to buy there. Still not, that's like sales tax up here. Again, still waiting officially on the announcement for Marchand for Carlo, but that is kind of what we have to work with right now. Again, as a whole, the Bruins have subtracted Brad Marchand, Brandon Carlo, Charlie Coyle, Trent Frederick, Justin Brazeau, and Max Jones. 3 of those guys are core leaders for this team. Frederick, Jones, Brazeau, less so, but they had been. Brazeau and Frederic, at least, contributing members. They bring in Jacob Lauko, Marat Hudnustidov, Casey Middlestat, Will Zellers, Fraser Minton. Apparently also Yoki Haru from the Buffalo Sabres, which I missed somehow. Max Warner, less of an impact guy, and a bunch of picks, a couple firsts or second conditional firsts. They did well to sell some guys with diminishing value, your Coyles, your Carlos, who knows what their value would be moving forward or what teams would be willing to pay. They undersold on Marchand, but there may be extenuating circumstances there in terms of where he wanted to go. And you dealt a couple guys who weren't going to come back. And you could probably put Marchand in that category as well. Overall, like pre-Marchand, I was very happy with what Don Sweeney was able to do. I will miss Charlie Coyle, Brandon Carlo. They've been great Bruins. They were key members of, the 2019 Stanley Cup final appearance, of the great run in 2023. They were key members of that transition last year with Krejci and Bergeron retiring leadership. But at the same time, to be able to get some pretty high-end assets in return for them at this stage in their careers is pretty nice. And to get some assets for Brazeau and Frederic, who are not coming back likely, is not bad at all. What it means for this season, they're not making the playoffs. They're going to be gunning for high draft picks. They're in the lottery chase at this point. But it'll be interesting to see how Middlestat fits in, how Hudnisnov fits in, what Lauko can bring back to the table. If Minton can even crack the Bruins roster at this time and bring something to the table, to track the progress of Zellers in particular. I'm very interested to see what he can do next year at North Dakota and moving forward. It's going to take a while to process trading the captain, trading Carlo, trading Coyle, Marchand in particular. I mean, I'm still a bit shocked. I didn't think it was going to happen. The rumors were out there. The reports were out there. I was thinking he might go west, like Edmonton or LA or something like that. To trade him to Florida really cuts deep. And cast will break down what we learned from Don Sweeney and his post-deadline availability. Will certainly look at the legacy of Brad Marchand in black and gold. They have a game this weekend as well, which is somewhat inconsequential at this point, but we'll continue to bring the stats, storylines, and signals from all those games. Thank you so much for joining me on this bonus episode. We wish Marchand the best. I mean, that would mean winning a Stanley Cup with the Florida Panthers, but that might also mean the Bruins getting a first-round pick eventually. So are we rooting for that? I don't know. We wish Carlo, Coyle the best. I hope I've kind of expressed my feelings on all this adequately. It is a tough thing to lose these guys. I know why there is some bad feelings in the fan base, why fans are upset. But apart from Marchand, I think it was pretty good asset management here from Don Sweeney overall. But that Marchand trade, especially to the Florida Panthers, especially gutting. So yeah, I'll be back on Monday with more thoughts on all of this, the fallout, what we learned from Don Sweeney on why these moves were made, and to recap what happens with regards to the Boston Bruins over the weekend. Thank you again for taking the time to listen. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for following along on social media as well. Please do subscribe if you have not already. Follow along at Locked NHL Bruins, and check out the Locked On NHL feed as well for all the latest from around the league with respect to the trade deadline. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.